Hi, hello. I'm your host, Chloe. Today I will be talking about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, written by Suzanne Collins. This is the prequel novel to the Hunger Games trilogy. Fair warning, I have previously read the trilogy. Since this prequel has countless nods and connections to the base three books, it will be really hard for me to completely avoid mentioning some of the details that are eventually going to overlap. I'll try to keep any of those spoilers minor. As always, the full-length episodes such as this one include spoilers. If you would like to listen to a spoiler-free mini episode on this book, simply click episode 4A, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. In this episode, I will be discussing the direction of the novel, Coriolanus' character, the 10th annual Hunger Games, the successful setups and payoffs, and elusive Lucy Gray. Let's talk about lit. I want to start this episode off by discussing the direction of the novel. Way back when this novel was first announced, it was referred to as the Untitled Panem novel. At that time, little to no information was available. No one knew who would appear in this novel or how it would tie into the overall story. I had a few theories. Theory number 1. A novel that featured the games of one of the prominent victors, such as Haymitch, Finnick, or Johanna. Haymitch's story would have been the most interesting, I think, because of the snippets that we are given throughout the trilogy. This would have allowed readers to see a complete games of the past, one which features the winning strategy of a character other than Katniss, as well as witness the development of a beloved and prominent character. Theory number 2. A novel that featured the games of a character or characters that are not present in the trilogy, most likely in the perspective of a character that originated from a district other than 12, either one that is underrepresented or one that bears careers. This would have allowed readers to see life in at least one other district, as well as a complete games of the past that may or may not end with the protagonist as a victor. Theory number 3. A novel that took place after the conclusion of Mockingjay, likely following the implications of post-war Panem. In order to avoid spoilers for Mockingjay, I'll just say this. There is a very tense and surprising conversation that occurs between the surviving victors and a leader, we'll say, towards the conclusion of the trilogy. What will Panem look like after the end of the Hunger Games? What we were given. A story about a young Coriolanus Snow and the 10th annual Hunger Games. Let's talk about the choice of POV. I was surprised that Collins chose to tell this story from the limited third-person point of view. We, as the audience, only knew what was going on in the mind and heart of Coriolanus, as opposed to all of the present characters. This choice contrasts to the base trilogy, which was written in first-person point of view from Katniss' perspective. I considered that Ballad was written in third-person limited to keep the reader at a distance from Coriolanus, which makes the experience of the reader that of a passive observer rather than an active participant. This could be true, but I think if the point of the novel was to allow readers to understand Coriolanus more, first person could have been a more effective choice. If the point of the novel was to provide readers with more context of the world, then I think that omniscient third person would have been a more effective choice. Ultimately, I think that the distance between the reader and Coriolanus made it even more difficult to relate or understand him, which made the overall reading experience less enjoyable, at least for me. I would have much preferred this story been told from Sejanus's or Lucy Gray's point of view. I think that Sejanus would offer a unique perspective because he was born in the districts but raised in the capital. To my recollection, there is no other named character with a background like that in the trilogy. Not only would it be avant-garde to walk in the shoes of someone who transitioned from life in the districts to the luxury of the capital and its citizenship, but it would be pertinent to the story. Sejanus's background is the driving force behind his motivation and the foundation of his belief system. We would see the capital and its work through the eyes of someone much like us, someone who has been in the districts before, someone who empathizes with the plight of the districts and the ruthlessness of the capital. Lucy Gray, similarly, also sees the world through the eyes of someone much like us. Her perspective would be unique in that she is Covey, a group of people who, to my recollection, are not mentioned at all in the trilogy. I was puzzled by the tidbits about Covey life that she shared, honestly unsure whether or not she was lying to get people's attention. Once I realized that the Covey were real, I wanted to know more. Her story has roots in a part of Panem we have never heard of before and will likely never hear of again. What other thoughts does a Covey have about the capital and the districts? Colin created such unique and dynamic characters, and it was an absolute waste that she didn't do more with them. Their stories are ones that I would want to read. The story of a spoiled rich white boy who hates the poor and sacrifices others for financial gains and power? Yeah, no thanks. Real life has enough of that already. Speaking of Coriolanus's character, also don't at me if I'm not pronouncing it right. I really don't care. Just let me do it. Let me be petty, okay? Okay. My distaste with this novel can be traced back to one thing: Coriolanus. Now, I don't want anyone to assume that I went into this novel with a closed mind and a defensive attitude. I, like many other fans of the Hunger Games, was apprehensive. Why would Collins choose Snow, the trilogy's antagonist, to be the protagonist of this long-anticipated prequel? Would she try to humanize him, to justify his later actions? What was her goal? I was genuinely curious about the Snow that we would see and what events would unfold before him. I tried my best to be open, especially at the start. That being said, I did know what direction his character would eventually head in. I am very familiar with the person that he becomes. The further that I progressed into this 500-page novel, the more I began to physically and emotionally reject the story because of the protagonist. His thoughts and actions made me feel nauseous and angry. I didn't enjoy reading them. Within the first 10 pages, we are witness to his thoughts on people who he believes are below him. On page 3, he refers to his family's financial situation as, quote, as poor as district scum. He associates value with wealth and power, which is one of the reasons why he rejects the districts so much. They embody the poverty and disadvantage that he despises. I think that his hatred is largely born out of fear. He is terrified of becoming what disgusts him. In this case, poor. His entire identity is defined by the status and the reputation that he garners based on financial and social standing. His drive to protect and preserve his status drives him to extreme measures. No sacrifice is too great as long as it is beneficial to him. The best example I can think of for this is his relationship with Sejanus. I will say, before I get into this, I loved Sejanus. I loved his character, and I absolutely loathe Coriolanus for what he did. Was that the point? I don't know. From the time that we are first introduced to Sejanus on page 16, Coriolanus makes his feelings very clear. The plinths now enjoyed privileges that the oldest, most powerful families had earned over generations. For Coriolanus, the plinths and their kind were a threat to all he held dear. the newly rich climbers in the capital were chipping away at the old order simply by virtue of their presence. Notice the use of earned in that quote. Coriolanus claims that the older families of the capital earned their wealth, even though all of their investments and profits are made by labor in the districts. That's the origin of his hatred. Another family has more wealth and luxury than his, and a family that is district-born no less. It is inconceivable to him that a family from the districts could procure more wealth and power than one capital-born. That people from the grimy, subhuman districts could experience a lavish lifestyle that the deserving citizens like him are deprived of. Excuse me while I go vomit. This belief is very important because he believes that Sejanus owes him, that the plinths owe the Snows. On page 454, Coriolanus' anger begins to come to a head. Someone should pay for the indignities of the Snow family, and who better than a plinth? The thing is, the plinths are not responsible for the fall of the Snow dynasty. The plinths are merely a scapegoat for the Snows to target, furthered by the Snows' disgust for the districts. Coriolanus betrays Sejanus, who called him his brother. He spends a good chunk of the book developing justifications for his plots to use Sejanus as a vehicle to propel himself further up the social ladder. When he sees the opportunity, he takes it, using a jabberjay to record Sejanus explaining the rebel plan before sending it off to the capital and Dr. Gall. This leads to Sejanus' execution by hanging, which was the most devastating moment of the book. Afterwards, on page 472, he asks himself, "What choice did you have?" What choice? No choice. Sejanus had been bent on self-destruction. This angered me. He had no choice? Sejanus wanted to leave Panem. He wanted to take the insurgents that could cause destruction in the districts and travel with them out of the country. Sejanus intentionally made a plan that involved no killing because he didn't want to hurt anyone. Coriolanus killed him because it would put him back in the good graces of the capital. On page 472, Coriolanus gets into Sejanus' locker and opens up his personal items box. Why not? He thinks to himself. Still believing that he too will be hanged because of Mayfair's murder, on page 473, he feels, quote, the need to get his affairs in order. How does he plan to do so, you ask? Let me tell you, by using Sejanus' money, sent in Sejanus' stationery, to the Snows. How noble of him, robbing a dead boy that he executed of his money. Absolutely sickening. Then, when confronted, or comforted rather, by Lucy Gray on page 482, who asks how the peacekeepers found out, he has the audacity to tell her, quote, I don't know. Someone betrayed him, I guess. Excuse me while I go scream into a pillow. Fast forward a bit to the resolution of the novel, where surely the consequences of his actions have caught up with him, right? Unfortunately, no. Coriolanus is back in the capital, living comfortably as he attends classes at the university. He's designated as the plinth's heir and receives no end of wealth from them. They are destroyed by the loss of Sejanus and see this as a means to mending their broken hearts and broken family. The plinths paid for everything now, he says on 512, even though Grandmam still views them as the help and not as friends or beneficiaries. This end result is, to me, as you can probably tell by my unchecked rage and aggression, Infuriating. He lies and betrays and hurts people, but he faces absolutely no consequences. His actions are instead rewarded and his behavior encouraged. There is, as I stated earlier, too much of this in real life, particularly with wealthy white men. I wouldn't have spent $30 and numerous hours to read this book and take all of the notes and write these episodes if I could have gotten the gist of it from turning on the TV and watching the news. On page 31, Coriolanus describes how the rebels, quote, held the food-producing districts. Taking a page out of the capital's playbook, they'd tried to starve the capital into submission using food, or lack thereof, as a weapon. Now the tables have turned again. This establishes that the capital, prior to the war, had controlled food production and used it as leverage over the districts. During the war, the districts, which produce the food for all of Panem, attempted to starve out the capital. Now that the war is over and the capital is back in control, they have returned to their abuse of power by using the food as leverage. Why did the capital return to such tactics? Coriolanus recalls the cannibalism that he witnessed during the war on page 31. That desperation that turned upstanding capital citizens into monsters. People who dropped dead from starvation in the streets became part of a gruesome food chain. Later, on page 34, we see that he believes that the lack of appropriate nutrition, quote, impeded his growth. If that was the experience of the capital during the brief period of war, what was the experience in all 13 districts prior to the war? Was food insecurity a contributing factor to the rebellion? If the elite of the capital resorted to such means to avoid starvation, why would they want to continue the cycle by retaliating against the districts? Why would they want to treat the districts even worse now with the addition of the Hunger Games than they did before the rebellion? I know that a large motivation is revenge, which is definitely an idea that Coriolanus subscribes to. Something that I don't understand is the hypocrisy of not only Coriolanus, but the majority of the capital. If you are so absolutely harrowed by the loss of capital children that you execute whoever is responsible and parade their corpses around, why do you force district children to kill each other while the whole nation watches? If you experienced food insecurity so severe that you resorted to cannibalism, why would you force those in the districts to starve? If the living conditions in the districts are so horrid that you consider suicide to escape living in them, why do you perpetuate the systems that prevent change? I could go on. I'm not asking these questions because I don't know the answers. I'm asking these questions because I don't understand how people could justify answering the way the capital does. But then again, if the capital was just and right, we wouldn't have an award-winning book series, now would we? The 10th annual Hunger Games is, to my recollection, the oldest games that we see in the series. There are moments throughout the trilogy where we catch glimpses into past games, such as Haymitch's, but this is the first time that a prior games was described fully in detail. Not only is the 10th annual Hunger Games unlike the 74th and 75th annual Hunger Games in terms of ceremony and structure, but we view number 10 through a new lens. We are given the exclusive perspective of a capital citizen and mentor, a first for the series. Given all this funky junk that sets precedence for the rest of the series, I thought I would break down this games so we could reference back to it going forward. I'll be asking some rhetorical questions to get you thinking about the next book. The teacher in me can't help it. Mentors. The 10th annual Hunger Games is the first games in which tributes are assigned mentors. The Academy selected 24 outstanding seniors to fill the positions. Are Capitol students always going to be mentors to the tributes, or will they be replaced with someone else following the events of this games? The Reaping. We see the reaping from the comfort of Heavensby Hall at the Academy. There, they watch the broadcast of the reapings in each of the 12 districts. Before the reapings start, each Capitol mentor is assigned to their tribute. On page 21, Coriolanus thinks to himself, "After 10 years, a pattern had emerged. The better-fed, more Capitol-friendly districts of 1 and 2 produced more victors, with the fishing and farming tributes from 4 and 11 also being contenders. Will this pattern hold by the time we reach the 74th annual Hunger Games?" Coriolanus, to his shock, is assigned to the District 12 female. On page 22, his opinions fly. The District 12 girl? Could there be a bigger slap in the face? District 12, the smallest district with its stunted, joint-swollen kids that always died in the first 5 minutes, and not only that, but the girl? To kick off the reapings, President Ravenstill is broadcasted as he recites a, quote, passage from the Treaty of Treason. The reapings follow, quote, moving from the east coast to the west, which meant that District 12 would be first. It seems that District 12 sets the precedent that the mayors of each district draw the male and female tributes' names from a sack. Though, as noted by Sejanus, there seems to be little accountability in terms of being impartial and completely random. The tributes' arrival in the capital. The districts arrive by train 2 days after the reaping. Coriolanus, who decided to be a rebel and bend the rules, decides to meet the train at the station and takes notice of the cars. Quote, Coriolanus looked for a glimpse of his tribute in the windows before he realized the cars had none. They were designed not for passengers but for cargo. Heavy metal chains attached by old-fashioned padlocks secured the goods. So, the tributes were escorted to the capital in cramped, windowless cattle cars, similar to the victims of the Holocaust or gulags. Is this how the tributes would be escorted in future games? The tributes are bound by chains and placed in an open-backed vehicle with a cage as they are transported to their next location, their accommodations. It is revealed, to our horror and Coriolanus's, that the tributes are held in the monkey cage at the zoo. No beds, no bathroom, and worst of all, no privacy from each other or from the prying eyes of news crews and capital citizens. Will tributes always be held in such demeaning and filthy conditions? On page 67, Lucy Gray reveals that the last time she ate was the night before the reaping, which means that the game makers had not fed the tributes upon arrival or during their first full day in the capital. The arena. On page 133, we get the first glance of the Capitol arena. Quote, the site of many an exciting sporting, entertainment, or military event. High-profile executions of the enemy were staged there during the war, making it a target for the rebel bombers. While the original structure stood, it was battered and unstable now, useful only as a venue for the Hunger Games. The lush field of meticulously tended grass had died from neglect. It was riddled with bomb craters, with weeds providing the only greenery on the expanse of dirt. Rubble from the explosions, chunks of metal and stone, lay everywhere, and the 15-foot wall that encircled the field was fissured and pockmarked from the shrapnel. Each year, the tributes would be locked in with nothing but an arsenal of knives, swords, maces, and the like to facilitate the bloodshed. This insinuates that the arena is an afterthought and isn't designed specifically for the Hunger Games. The arena is not updated or changed between the games, which means that those who are able to watch know what to expect from year to year in terms of setup. Moving forward, will the Capitol erect an entirely new arena for the games? Will there be changes from year to year, or will it be static and remain the same? The sponsor system. Coriolanus's proposal for the sponsor system is described on page 104. For the first time, sponsors would be able to buy items, a piece of bread, a chunk of cheese, to be delivered by drone to a specific tribute. We see later that the drone deliveries are far from perfect and oftentimes result in waste. Continuing on, quote, a sponsor would have to be a capital citizen in good standing who was not directly related to the games. This would, in theory, prevent prejudice from barring food to the tributes. Based on previous descriptions, I can assume that the prior 9 games saw tributes die of starvation and thirst, since the game makers had not been feeding them, and there are no natural or provided sources of food in the capital arena. This new system would increase the odds of tributes like Lucy Gray. Will the options for items be expanded to include more than food? The interviews. Based on Coriolanus' summary of the Hunger Games on page 14, it sounds like this was the first games to feature tribute interviews. The Capital TV weatherman Lucretius Lucky Flickerman was chosen to host the interviews, which took place in the Academy's auditorium. The interviews were optional and featured both the mentor and their tribute. The interviews that are described on pages 168 to 169 reflect the novelty of the interviews, as the pairs that did go on stage appeared rather unprepared with little intervention or help from Lucky. The main purpose of the interviews was to promote the tributes to possible sponsors. Will that continue throughout the years, or will the interviews serve another purpose? The games. The games are also hosted by Lucky Flickerman, who provides some mediocre entertainment and occasional commentary. I'm not going to give a play-by-play of the games, but I will hit on the main points. The mentors are given communicuffs to request sponsored items. This is a big deal because, as stated on page 201, so much personal technology had disappeared during the war and its aftermath, as manufacturing had focused on other priorities. These days, even simple devices were a big deal. As the capital is able to recover from the war, will new technologies be developed and implemented into the games? Lucky prefaces the games by giving a brief remote tour of each district. The anthem plays and the shot cuts to the arena. The tributes are in a circle, standing in wait for a gong to signal the beginning of the games. Once the gong sounds, the games begin. From there, it's a matter of the tributes trying to survive by claiming sponsored items and engaging in combat with each other. The game makers intervene once, in which they release Dr. Gall's mutant snakes into the arena to shake things up. I'm not counting the whole thing with Sejanus. Will mutts play a prominent role in later games? Will the game makers have a heavier hand in later games, or will they leave the killing to the tributes? The victor. Lucy Gray Baird is declared the victor as the only other remaining tribute, Reaper, dies. She is searched after leaving the arena and sent back to District 12. Will the victors always be sent straight home? Aside from the money that Dean Highbottom gave her on the DL, she received no monetary reward or prize that I can remember. Did Dean Highbottom, in his guilt, do the same for the previous tributes? Will victors eventually be given prizes or other privileges? Let's just say the work has only begun for young Coriolanus Snow. One thing that I admired about Ballad were the intentional setups and payoffs, whose success furthered the story. If you aren't sure what I mean when I say setups and payoffs, think of cause and effect, like one domino knocking over the next in the line, knocking over the next and the next, and so on and so on. There were so many moments of this throughout the book, but I'm only going to focus on a handful. I'm going to cover the 3 threads of setups and payoffs that lead to Coriolanus' expulsion from the academy and his sentence to serve as a peacekeeper. This book is over 500 pages long, guys, so I'm not going to include page numbers for this section because it would take me ever to go back and find each and every specific page. Don't at me. Thread 1. Snakes. Setup. Lucy Gray has an affinity for snakes, as is shown in the reaping. The payoff. Lucy Gray is able to use snakes to her advantage during the games. Setup. Arachne, Clemencia, and Coriolanus are chosen to write a proposal. Arachne is killed, and Clemencia is too upset to work on the proposal. Payoff. Coriolanus has to complete the proposal by himself. Setup. Coriolanus printed off the proposal himself and carried it in his personal bag. Clemencia had not seen the document prior to Coriolanus dropping it off at the Citadel. Payoff. Coriolanus' scent was on the documents. Clemencia's wasn't. Setup. The snake mutants in Dr. Gall's lab do not attack when they recognize a scent. Payoff. The snakes attack Clemencia because her scent was not on the document, which Dr. Gall had put in the snake's tank. Setup. Coriolanus knows that the snakes do not attack when they recognize a scent. Payoff. Coriolanus is able to use this information to his advantage. Setup. Coriolanus lets Lucy Gray use a handkerchief. Lucy Gray gives it back to him after she uses it. Payoff. Coriolanus is able to put the handkerchief, which has Lucy Gray's scent on it, into the snake tank. Setup. The snakes become familiar with Lucy Gray's scent. Payoff. The snakes recognize her scent and do not attack her when they are released in the arena. Setup. Aiding a tribute by interfering in the game maker's work is cheating. Payoff. Coriolanus can be punished for cheating. Thread 2. Rats. Setup. Coriolanus has a powder compact that belonged to his mother. Payoff. Coriolanus is able to give said compact to Lucy Gray to use during the games. Setup. The tributes are staying at the zoo. There is rat poison throughout the zoo, including in the cage that the tributes are staying in. Payoff. The rat poison is available to Lucy Gray. Setup. Lucy Gray was given the empty makeup compact before the games started. Payoff. She was able to put rat poison in the compact. Setup. Lucy Gray had the compact with rat poison. Payoff. Lucy Gray was able to use the rat poison to her advantage in the arena. Setup. Lucy Gray was able to use the rat poison to her advantage in the arena. Payoff. Lucy Gray was able to kill Wovey and Reaper. Setup. Lucy Gray was able to kill Reaper. Payoff. Lucy Gray became the victor of the 10th annual Hunger Games. Setup. Aiding a tribute by giving them supplies or weapons is cheating. Payoff. Coriolanus can be punished for cheating. Thread 3. Great Punch. Setup. The Academy provides meals for the mentors. Payoff. Coriolanus and Sejanus eat at the Academy. Setup. Coriolanus is able to refill his glass at the meal. Payoff. Coriolanus spills his glass of grape punch after refilling it and uses his napkin to clean it up. Setup. Sejanus is distressed and unsettled following Arachne's funeral. Payoff. Sejanus doesn't eat most of the food that's on his plate. Setup. The Academy punishes students who waste food by not eating it. Payoff. Coriolanus doesn't want Sejanus to be punished. Setup. The game makers have been starving the tributes. Payoff. Coriolanus wants to get Lucy Gray more food. Setup. Coriolanus doesn't want Sejanus to get in trouble for wasting food, and he wants to get extra food to Lucy Gray. Payoff. Coriolanus takes Sejanus' food to give to Lucy Gray. Setup. Coriolanus uses his napkin to smuggle Sejanus' leftovers to Lucy Gray. Payoff. Lucy Gray has Coriolanus' napkin in the arena during the arena tour. Setup. Lucy Gray has the napkin in the arena during the arena tour when the bombs go off. Payoff. When the game makers comb through the arena after the bombing, the napkin is found. Setup. The Academy napkins have an official seal on them. Payoff. Dean Highbottom knows that the napkin that Lucy Gray had was from the Academy. Setup. The Academy punishes students who take food out of the dining hall. Payoff. Coriolanus can be punished for taking food and using the napkin. I know that probably most definitely got really repetitive, but I wanted to take the time to break each of them down further so that way you could see how these small details, or dominoes if you will, build up the conflict. I really liked that I was able to go back and I could trace, kind of like with like an ancestry tree, I could go back and trace the ending result and all of the little things that led to it. It wasn't just, oh, this thing happened. It was, oh, this happened and this happened. And because this was here, then that made this person do this, and so on and so forth. And I thought that that really built up the story, and it just made it a lot more complex and interesting. From the moment Lucy Gray's name was called at the reaping, I was invested. She reminded me a lot of Johanna, bold and decisive. It was simultaneously refreshing and intimidating to have such an outgoing and performative character to be at the forefront of the novel. That was my initial impression, anyway. As the story progressed, I grew to appreciate more than what Lucy Gray presented at the surface, such as the quiet intelligence that she possessed. While Coriolanus undoubtedly made her survival and victory possible, she would have perished and been forgotten had it not been for her ingenuity and charisma. I also admired her heart. While not utterly selfless and pure like Peeta's, it was still empathetic towards the plight and struggles of others. Something that could teach Coriolanus a lesson or two. Speaking of the two of them, I have a few concluding thoughts. I hated their romantic relationship. It felt incredibly forced and inorganic. It reminds me a lot of a relationship that I will discuss in a future episode for a different series. Stay tuned on that. It didn't help that Coriolanus continuously tried to make her seem human, as opposed to subhuman, in order to justify any feelings towards her or any positive things that she does. On page 194, he describes her as, quote, a second-class citizen, human but bestial, smart perhaps but not evolved, part of a shapeless mass of unfortunate, barbaric creatures that hovered on the periphery of his consciousness. His competing view of her as an object is also offensive and problematic at best. On page 172, he asserts his ownership over her. Quote, his girl, his. Here in the capital, it was a given that Lucy Gray belonged to him, as if she'd had no life before her name was called out at the reaping. He insinuates that her life did not start or hold any value until she became his. The lack of autonomy does not sit well with me. I don't believe that he loved her for two reasons. One, I don't think that Coriolanus has a healthy or complete understanding of what love is. Two, I don't believe that you are capable of loving someone if you perpetuate minimizing their rights and force them to live in terrible conditions. That goes for real life too. You can't love someone and support the systems or the people that strive to take away their rights or oppress them. I think his hypocrisy and declining mental state is finally exhibited in one of the final chapters of the book, where he plans on murdering her. On page 243, after Coriolanus rescued Sejanus from the arena, he shares an exchange with Dr. Gull. Well, mission accomplished with that little one from 8. You beat him to a pulp. So he had what? Murdered the boy? No, not that. It was an open and shut case of self-defense. On page 464, he rationalizes killing Mayfair. Not murder at all, really. Just another form of self-defense. By this line of logic, Lucy Gray had only ever killed in self-defense as well, right? Coriolanus even tells her on page 158, it's the Hunger Games. It's all self-defense. So, I'm just curious, why is it then that on page 499 he describes her like this. He thought about how coolly she'd killed in the arena. First, that frail little Wovie, that was a cold-blooded move if he'd ever seen one. Then the calculated way she'd taken out Treach, baiting him to attack her, really, so she could whip out that snake out of her pocket. And she claimed that Reaper had rabies, that it was a mercy kill. But who knew? This is the justification that he needs to kill her. He doesn't want to kill her, and even if he did, it's because she's a cold-blooded murderer who deserves it, and not because she's the only other person alive who can incriminate him in a previous murder that he committed. I find the ambiguity poetic in that it parallels the poem that is her namesake, but I do have to wonder, is she dead? Let me leave you with this quandary. How is it that they were both able to use rat poison that was found in the zoo to successfully murder 3 people combined when it couldn't even kill rats? Take page 120, for example. She indicated a container of white powder by the bars. That stuff doesn't do a lick of good. This, plus the fact that the rats are plenty enough to cause discomfort and even spread rabies, implies that the rat poison isn't killing the rats. Yeah, I know. On page 118, a peacekeeper says that, quote, "The rats are so smart, they won't go near it." If this is true, how could both Lucy Gray and Coriolanus use it to kill people? Rats are a tiny fraction of the size of an average human being. If the rat poison is not potent enough in its purest form to kill rats, how could it possibly kill humans when it was diluted? Both Wovie and Reaper drank water that had smaller amounts of the poison in it, and they died within minutes. Dean Highbottom consumed morphling with traces of the poison in it, and it's implied that he dies from it as well. How is this possible? Are humans just less intelligent than rats? I need answers. Suzanne Collins, I need to know. Anyway, there you have it. My thoughts on Suzanne Collins' The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm so glad I have this done. I hope that none of you were disappointed with how long it took me to get this episode out. The fall semester started a few days after I published episode 4A, followed by other personal circumstances that have to do with COVID and life, and my free time has virtually disappeared. I intentionally have not established a set schedule for publishing episodes for this exact reason. Moving forward, I will try to be more cognizant of the time that has elapsed between episodes in hopes to avoid slums like this. Please be patient with my process. I want to be able to produce the best content that I can, and that takes a lot of time. I appreciate all of the support that I receive from you, my small following of YA fans. Join me next time for episodes 5A and 5B, The Hunger Games. Let's talk about lit. Thanks for listening.